Financial argument. Follow us on YouTube.
Now, we're going to head out to Greece, and we can see that Greece right now remains in an economic depression. Whatever the IMF, whatever the Troika did, by giving Greece more and more of these loans, putting them further and further into debt, it didn't help anything. And now what they want to do is they're looking to hike VAT, and they're going to add new taxes, which really means more austerity on the people. Now, when we're looking at this situation, we can see that the people are going to get very, very angry and eventually say enough is enough. Now, of course, what the central bankers are saying, well, don't worry about it. Greece is going to do fine. All they have to do is have a GDP of like 3%, which they can do, which they haven't done, by the way. All they have to do is make their payments, which they can't do. And all they have to do is continually place austerity on the people. And of course, you know the people are going to suffer. And we're starting to see riots. The government that they elected is not doing what they said they were going to do. And eventually what's going to happen is we're going to have a major revolution where the people say, okay, we've had enough. We can't do this anymore. We need to take over the system. And I wouldn't be surprised that this is not that far into the future. Now, here in the United States, the U.S. government central bankers, they will not let up, and they will continually push the idea, and they're continually doing it, telling us that everything is fine. Retail is fine. Housing is fine. And we're going through a retail apocalypse right now, where a lot of the stores, Sears, Macy's, Target, JCPenney, Gap, Old Navy, and many, many others, reporting that their earnings are declining. They're closing stores, laying off people. Now, what I found very interesting in the Wall Street Journal is there was an article that said retail earnings say less and less about the U.S. economy. Well, let's think back for a second. There was an article that said manufacturing says less and less about the U.S. economy because we're a service economy. Well, if we're a service economy, doesn't that depend on retail and other type of services? Because, as I know, consumer spending is about, 70% of the economy. But what's happening here is when these economic indicators report negative, they need to show, and this is coming from the U.S. government, the corporate media, that they're not important. Retail is not important in the U.S. Manufacturing is not important in the U.S. when we're talking about the economy. Quality of jobs, not important. All those people that fell off the job market, really not that important. So let's think about this. What's important then? What's important? The stock market? The bubbles? The student loans? Really, at this point, all they're doing is removing all the things that make up the economy, and they're left with what? Central bank manipulation, creating bubbles, and stock market. And that just shows you right there that this whole thing is fake, phony, and false. So let's look back. They're telling us it's unimportant about all these different things. Well, here are the 10 companies that have cut the most jobs in 2016. National Oil Well, 17,850, and this is this year. Walmart, 16,000 people. Schlumberger, 12,500. Intel, 12,000. Halliburton, 10,000. Dell, 10,000. Chevron, 7,500. Buffett's, 6,000. DuPont, 6,000. Weatherford International, 6,000. And this is just the top 10 companies. And it goes on and on and on. So when we look at this and we look at all the store closures, we look at all the stores declining in sales, we look at Caterpillar declining in sales, IBM declining in sales, manufacturing is absolutely awful. And when we look at manufacturing, U.S. manufacturing PMI for May printed at 50.5. It's the lowest since 2009. And market, and I'm not talking about like the stock market or the market for the economy, the company market. They're saying that output is falling for the first time since the height of the global financial crisis, with factories hit by slow growth. And right now what we're looking at is U.S. manufacturing. They're falling for the fourth successive month in May. U.S. manufacturers signaled the first reduction in output since September 2009. We're looking at weak manufacturing, weak retail sales, weak consumer spending. The economy is continually throwing indicator after indicator, letting us know that the economy cannot survive like this. It's completely impossible. Now, we've had another red flag, and this is about temp help. Ahead of the last two recessions, hiring by staff agencies rolled over. Well, it just happened again. So what we're seeing right now is that in the past, going back a couple of years, these temp jobs, well, they led the jobs recovery since the Great Recession, and now it's all over. The last two times the temp help sector slowed down, everything rolled over, which means we went into deep recessions, the economy crashed. We're going to see it once again. This is where we are headed. And we see that the Baltic Dry Index, it's holding at 624. It's down 1 point, but it's not moving anywhere. And trade with Japan, well, that just continually collapses. For 7 months in a row, exports have declined. And imports, they're declining for 16 months. This is the worst plunge that we've seen since 2009. And when you look at the graph, you can see that we are in a downward trend. We broke the barrier. We're in negative territory right now, and the situation's getting worse and worse as time goes on. Now, out in the EU, we understand the banks are prepared and getting ready for bail-ins. We know this because documents were signed and all banks had to come into compliance. Now, we understand out in the Eurozone that the Eurozone is going to look at each bank and they're going to go on a case-by-case basis. And the European Commission, they adopted a new regulation on Monday, clarifying that there will be no harmonized minimum level of bank assets that can be wiped out by regulators when a lender is down. A move that slightly softens requirements for banks. So this decision relieves the banks from the possible obligation of having to hold at least 8% of their liabilities and own funds. So right now the banks, they don't have to really hold that much. And they're going to be bailed in when the Eurozone looks at each bank and says, okay, we can save these, we can't save those. And that's all we can do at this point. So we can see it right now. What they're continually doing is they're making it better and better for the banks to survive, that they don't have to hold that much, because they realize that eventually what they're going to do is they're going to go inward and take the funds from the people. Same thing's going to happen here in the United States. And this most likely will occur on a Friday. They'll declare a bank holiday. Something will happen. They'll say there's a cyber attack. There'll be some type of malware. And they'll say, don't worry, everyone. This is normal. We're prepared for this. Banks will reopen on Monday. Well, they said this in Cyprus. They said this in Greece. And it just didn't happen. And most likely the scenario for this is that they're going to say that the banks were attacked somehow, some way. They need to close down most likely on a Friday. This is when they normally do it. And they'll say, don't worry about it. On Monday, we will open the banks. We need the weekend to go through the systems to find out what happened. Now, of course, what's going to happen is Monday is going to come. And like we saw in Cyprus and Greece, they didn't open the banks. They put limits on the banks, how much people can take out. And we're going to see this happen here. And eventually what they do is they trade in your currency for worthless bank stock. So this is a scenario, a situation they've been preparing for a very long time. And they're getting ready to use it, because there's no reason to prepare it unless you're going to use it. Now, Russia and China, they have been doing everything to bypass the dollar completely. And we see right now is the de-petrodollarization continues. At the end of 2015, China had become Russia's biggest oil customer. And as of April, Russian oil shipments to China hit a record high. Russia has surpassed Saudi Arabia as the biggest crude exporter to China. And we can see right now that Beijing has ramped up its imports of Russian oil by 52.4% last month compared to a year earlier. And they're doing all of this without the dollar. And this is what the U.S. is and the central bankers are most afraid of, is that in the Middle Eastern countries, all of these countries, they decide to use their own currency. They decide to use gold or silver to trade their natural resources, bypassing the dollar. If everyone bypasses the dollar, we have a major problem on our hands. Now, this major problem is going to come no matter what, because the debt can't be sustained, but this will just accelerate it, and will hit sooner than later. This is why the U.S. government central bankers are out there pushing regime change, pushing to take control, to keep the system propped up so they can bring it down themselves. They don't want a black swan type of scenario. They want to bring down this entire economy on their own. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared.